There are 3 types of labels: centerfold, side seam, and end fold. Technically these are both centerfold, but the majority of these labels are exposed, whereas for these, only the text is exposed. But in both cases, the raw edges are usually enclosed within the seam. For end fold labels, they are sewn onto the fabric and can be attached with top stitching or decorative stitches. So now is a good time to think about what type of label you want to use and where you'd like to display it on your garment. So, at this point, after cutting out the project, I like to select the label and decide on its placement. Let's have a look in my label collection and choose one to work with. This top has a high neck, so I want to mark the back. Because it's finished with bias, I will choose a centerfold label. I'll pop it near the center back and pin it in place. Just like this. Okay. Let's just move this out of the way. This top is also similar at the front and back, so it needs a label at the back too. I could choose either label type, but I think I'll go with this one, an end fold label. Let's just pop it into position and I'll clip it in place. This is just another easy option instead of a pin. I think this would also look great with a side seam label, right here. Let's go back to the collection. I'm going to work with this one and pin it in place. By doing this step now, I am reminding future Kylie that I plan on attaching a label because it's really easy to forget once you start sewing and get into the flow. When your garment has a facing, it's a fantastic opportunity to get creative with labels. You could use an end fold label like one of these. I'll just pop this here so I can get a feel for how it's going to look. Maybe I want something more statement. You know what? I'm going to use a label stack instead. Here's one I prepared earlier. I'm going to secure it in place now. I could do this with pins, but I prefer glue. So at some point when sewing the garment, you're going to come across your pin label. But it might need a little adjusting before you sew the seam. Let's check. This gauge is set at my seam allowance, and for this garment it's 1 centimeter, but it's not exactly in the right position. It's exposing more of the label than I'd like. Ideally, I'd want it like this. So I'm just going to reposition it. I'll move it back a little and check again. Might go back a little further. If you're using the KATM mini ruler, 1 centimeter is equal to 3 notches. So just check it. Check the side. That looks good. Let's pin it back in, and now I'll take it to the sewing machine. Basting a side seam label is essential. Basting is just a line of stitches you use to keep something in place while you sew the final seam. So I'll just do this with a simple straight stitch inside the seam allowance. Because we have secured the label in place with basting stitches, we can now confidently sew the garment with right sides together and know the label is in the correct position. And now it will look like this. A little label to display on the outside of your garment. To secure your centerfold label, you can place it in where you like and repin it. Like that. This is a fine method, but it adds a little too much bulk. So I actually prefer to use a glue stick to secure the position of my label. So I just put some glue on the top and then on the bottom. This will allow both layers of the label to be attached. Now I'll just place the label and press down. That's going to hold it in place even better than using a pin. We are now going to stitch our label into position. I like to start my stitch line further back where the shoulder is because it's the least obvious place to start and finish. And just go for it. There you have it. Your label is in position and offers a nice finishing touch to your garment. It's time to sew this label in the back. We've clipped it in place and made sure it's in the center. But before we sew, I like to use the glue to hold it in position. Simply apply a bit of glue at each end to hold the label in place. This glue stick is so good that once you've pressed the label down, it's ready to go, and you can just remove the clip. Your options to sew this on are varied, and it's really personal preference. But for this one, I'm going to show you how to use a zigzag stitch as a tack. I love this stitch as it's really easy to do. To get started, just position where you'd like to do the stitches. Now I'm going to choose a zigzag stitch at 0 length and the factory width. When sewing, just make sure the needle is zigzagging on and off the label a few times. I like how this looks. It's very minimal. On the facing of this dress, we previously glue basted the 2 labels in place. All we're going to do now is sew a straight stitch along each edge. At this point, I think it's worth taking the time to swap your thread color so that it matches the label rather than your garment. And a fresh needle will give you the best results. Backstitch a little, take your time, and there you have it. I'm going to do the other side now. We will follow the same process as before. It doesn't have to be too perfect, and it's ideal to get 1 stitch over each edge. I find that this helps the label sit flatter. Before trimming the loose threads away, I like to pull them back to the reverse side and clip at the back so that you don't have any loose threads on top. And that's it. Easy.